The Business Breakfast on Jazz FM.
Where it is 17 minutes past 6. It's Wednesday the 13th of January. I'm Nick Howard here on the Jazz FM Business Breakfast. Now, taxi drivers are calling for priority access to coronavirus jabs, arguing they're at risk from passengers and financially unstable due to being self-employed. The licensed private hire car association, which represents the industry, has written to government putting forward their case. Their chairman, Steve Wright, explains why he thinks they should be a priority.
They need to be a priority because of their need to work and their need to interact with critical people. They meet a lot of people in the health service. They're doing a lot of the educational transfers, and they are also picking up members of the public. So it absolutely makes sense for them to be able to be inoculated earlier rather than later.
But from the point of view of governments, there are going to be a lot of sectors with very good arguments for being made a priority. First of all, are we talking about drivers being a priority above, for example, older or vulnerable people?
Absolutely not. We've made it clear that the very top priority people, the health service, the health workers, people in care homes, etc., need to be vaccinated firstly, and of course by age. But once that is done, it really should be given consideration to taxi and private hire vehicle.
But I'm only thinking about this from the kind of people who will be reading the letter that you've sent. They'll be getting similar letters from police forces, teachers, retail workers as well. Why should drivers be in there?
Well, I think teachers and the educational people are already in the top priorities. I don't know about the police force. They're not going to have the same kind of interaction as a private hire vehicle and taxi driver that is possibly taking teachers, possibly taking nurses, possibly taking other groups, including children, to school. And they are in very, very close proximity in a confined space. And they're interacting with these people. So for this reasons, we've actually asked for them to be prioritised.
Now, in the first lockdown, or following the first lockdown, we saw data from the Office for National Statistics which suggested that drivers were more at risk than some other groups. Has that changed?
No, sadly, it hasn't. Taxi and private hire is amongst, I think it was second in the most vulnerable group of workers. There have been many deaths and many, many illnesses. That's another reason. It all emanates from that close proximity. Also, there are people travelling around that are not utilising masks. They're not meeting their exemption requirements. And for this reason, we are really on the front line in taxi and private hire. The drivers are really, really facing people and needing to interact with people. You know, we believe that they can fall into the super spreader category if they're not actually vaccinated.
Is there more that could be done to protect drivers? I mean, you say that masks aren't being worn by passengers. Is there more protection that can be put in place for them?
Well, one of the big problems, and we've raised this constantly with government, is the exemption. You don't have to prove you're exempt. Therefore, any passenger can say they're exempt. So that makes it very difficult for the driver. We've also got onto government to try to get screens put in between the drivers and the passengers and grants for PPE and for cleaning materials. But so far, in 9 months, that's achieved absolutely nothing.
What's the likely outcome for the industry? Could we see a shortage of drivers?
Absolutely. We're very concerned we could have an absolutely catastrophic shortage of drivers. Now, there's 3 reasons for this. 1, drivers are dying. 2, drivers are scared to return. And 3, it's economically unviable for them to return. Many of them have actually got other jobs, other delivery jobs that have a far smaller overhead. I was talking to a driver that normally runs an S-Class. He does chauffeur type work, mainly airport transfers and executive work. And he's actually said that he'd be far better selling the S-Class, not having to pay for licensing, all manner of screening and testing and medicals. And actually, there's not going to be much in it. A lot less aggravation. So a lot of drivers are actually doing that, and we fear they won't return.
Do you think post-pandemic, if drivers leave the industry, I mean, ultimately, presumably it's going to mean higher costs if you actually want to take a taxi or a car somewhere?
Without a doubt. I'm fairly certain that a consequence is a supply and demand business. People are they're more reticent to take public transport because the person next to you could be coughing and spluttering, something very nasty that can kill you. So that will come into play, and there has been a demand for business. And that's part of the reason, sadly, that we've got the deaths, and it's part of the reason we want to make sure that we get the PPE, we get the money for that, and of course we get the vaccinations done.
That was Steve Wright, chairman of the Licensed Private Hire Car Association.